Let's talk about friendship. All right, so in The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis describes four distinct types of love as they're described in Greek. Now, the premise of the book, if you haven't seen my previous videos on this, is basically in English, people tend to use like and love interchangeably, whereas in the Greek, there were four different words that describe very specific types of love. So in that book, basically in the introduction, he explains his premise. He goes into quite a bit of detail about that. And then in each chapter, he breaks down each distinct type of love. And those are affection, friendship, eros. Probably don't have to explain eros, but we'll still talk about it in a couple weeks. And then charity. So today we're going to talk about friendship. He jokes a little bit that when one is talking about eros, you find a ready and able audience. When you talk about friendship, he says there's a lot less interest. That is humorous. I kind of wonder if that would change a little bit today because I'm seeing so much talk about how people are having a difficult time connecting and people are feeling isolated, especially after the pandemic. So I think this is a timely subject that's important. Now, this book was published in 1960, so I encourage you to read it, but just understand that he lived in a much different time. And if you haven't read anything from that era, you may not realize how much times have changed. Times have changed a lot. And one of the things that's seen a massive change from his lifetime to the current day is the workforce. And men and women work side by side a lot more than they did back in the 1950s and prior. That is a massive difference. Now, he does talk about in the book how, because he was in the education profession, in his profession, men and women were more likely to work side by side than in almost any other profession. The reason this comes up is because there can definitely get some lines crossed when people get friendship and eros confused. The only advice I can really give is if you feel like you're in one of those situations where one person is only thinking about friendship and the other person is thinking about romance, some kind of communication needs to take place. And I know that's uncomfortable. It's not comfortable for anybody, but it's only going to get worse if the conversation doesn't happen. If the conversation takes place and it's done in the right way, any pain that takes place isn't going to be as bad as if somebody thinks something is developing when it's not. So, good luck with that. One of the big differences that he talks about quite a bit is between friendship and eros is when people are in a romantic relationship. He says most of the time they tend to sit kind of facing each other. They're paying attention to each other, and a lot of their conversations are about each other and their goals and their hopes and dreams and their future together. And as the relationship progresses, what they're working on, children, careers, whatever. But when people are friends, that friendship is usually about a subject. So it can be, and it doesn't matter what the subject is, but that is sort of the catalyst that will ignite a friendship is two people or three people, like a small group of people, will discover spontaneously that they're interested or passionate about the same subject. He says quite often when that happens, a person might feel like they're like the only person that was passionate about something, and then they find someone else that is passionate about it, and they have someone to discuss with it, and they become friends. So, because of that common interest, he says friends tend to sit more like side by side, looking at a subject, not sitting across from each other, gazing at each other, and talking about each other. One thing I should say, and this is probably obvious to most of you, but with all these, there can be some overlap. Obviously, as I talked about a minute ago, there can also be some confusion, but if you have two people in a romantic relationship, there should also be friendship, hopefully. And you'll also see affection and you'll also see charity. There's going to be overlap in there. If you have two people that are strictly friends, you will not see overlap into eros, generally speaking. Obviously, there are times when two people will start out as friends, and as that friendship develops, other things will happen, and that's fine. So it's just good to understand that there all these things can overlap, but they can also be compartmentalized where they can exist by themselves. He sort of opens the chapter talking about how, from a literary standpoint, and if you've never read C.S. Lewis, C.S. Lewis looked at the world through a literary lens. Like the man thought about poetry, he thought about literature. And if you ever read one of his books, like he references other authors and poems and things quite a bit. it can make them a little bit challenging to read because I like to read, but I cannot keep up with C.S. Lewis. So what he gets into is how if you go back far enough in literature, friendship was a highly esteemed love. He thinks it was like the most honored love. But as times changed and social things changed, friendship fell out of favor. Now he is very specific about how back in the day in the literature, friendship and eros were separate. So when he's talking about friendship from a literary standpoint, he's not talking about erotic relationships or romantic relationships. He's talking about friendship as a distinct thing. That can be difficult because I think, as he talks about, and I think this has just progressed, a lot of people want to see every relationship in a sexual context, and every relationship is not sexual. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but it is 2023. Now, establishing that, one of the things he talks about that's also very interesting is he makes a distinction between companionship and friendship because he says that a lot of people have either companions or acquaintances and they think they're friends, but it's not the same thing. And I think particularly this gets confusing in modern times where people get on social media and friend people and follow people and have all these online interactions with people they've possibly never met in person or maybe they haven't seen in a long time. And that is some of that I think is healthy, some of it's not. We're structured for interaction with people. I actually would be much more comfortable giving any of these talks if I was in front of a crowd of strangers than I am talking to this bloody camera. I do not like the camera. I'm not a technophobe, but I would much rather talk to a group of people that I can look at and see and interact with than this. Anyway, that's not important. The point is, we need to interact with people in person. Especially, I think that's something that people have really realized since the pandemic, where so many people have been isolated and more people are, if they're not at work, they're online. We need to interact with each other. But he makes the distinction between companionship and friendship because he said that even in his time, he felt like a lot of people didn't experience true friendship, so they didn't really get it. They didn't understand it. I think that's true today too. Establishing friendships is really psychologically healthy. It's emotionally healthy. One of the things there is when we look at like four distinct types of love, I think part of the function there is we're not going to get all of our need met from any individual one of those. So we have affection, friendship, eros, and charity, and none of those in isolation is going to meet all of our needs. We need bits and pieces of all four. Even I think in a good healthy relationship, in a good healthy romantic relationship, expecting your the other party to meet all of your needs isn't practical. Even if you have a great relationship and the communication is good, I think that a man needs friends and a woman needs friends. And part of the reason for that is sometimes it's just easier to communicate with people you're not in a relationship with. I have known a lot of guys who could not explain to their girlfriend or spouse anything emotional. And it's not that they were emotionally broken, it was just they had a difficult time with that. But they could go to a pub and sit down with a friend and have a pint and have no problem explaining what they were feeling. None. There's a couple reasons for this. One is just I think it's just easier sometimes to communicate with someone who's the same sex. It's less complicated. You don't have to explain, you don't have to translate anything, you can just talk. I know it's not a popular opinion today, but another thing is sometimes when two people are in a relationship and one person feels a certain way about something and they explain it or they attempt to explain it to the other party, sometimes the response they'll get is that's stupid. If someone is explaining to you how they feel about something or they're passionate about something and you don't relate to it and you reply by telling them their feelings are stupid or their thoughts are stupid, you are teaching them not to communicate with you. They will learn that and they will go communicate with other people. The last thing he talks about that gets into details about why he thinks friendship has fallen out of favor is because friendship is often distrusted by authority figures. So he tells us that men who have real friends are harder for good authorities to correct or for bad authorities to corrupt. Another point that he says is friendship makes good men better and bad men worse. So that's worth thinking about. And along those lines, be cautious about who you let into your life. They say you're made of the five people you spend the most time with. So you should be, if you meet someone new and you're figuring them out, be selective about who you allow in your life. Now, in a work environment, you don't have a lot of control over that, but you have control over who comes to your house or to whose house you go to. Don't let people into your life that are going to bring bad things into your life. The last thing he talks about is how, like, within the confines of a friendship can create kind of a situation of us versus them. By its nature, involves exclusion because you've got people that are part of the group and then everyone else is outside of the group. Now, that might just be about a subject that is harmless, like stamp collecting, which is pretty archaic now, I think. Do people still do that? But it's one that he talks about. Or it could be about racing cars or whatever. There's a lot of different any subject you're interested in. Friendship can be about that. It doesn't matter. Something you can discuss with someone else that you're both passionate about. But it can create kind of an people in the group and people out of the group. And that can be fine and harmless, but it can also cause problems. When that little group becomes elite, or if they become elite in their mind, it can cause complications. And the way he talks about it is he describes it can go one of two ways. He says a healthy outlook can be what he called Olympian. Keep in mind, everything with him goes back to literature, which he describes as tranquil and tolerant of outsiders. The other way it can go is Titanic, which he says is militant and embittered. While C.S. Lewis describes friendship as being possible of being a very healthy love, he strongly cautions against letting it become what he calls a self elected aristocracy basking in the moonshine of our collective self approval. So, go make friends and go read a book.